Hello, and welcome to another episode of Occult Podcast, the podcast where we do, or at least talk about, inadvisable things in the name of magical science. I am Tyler Cadmian, and with me is...
Felix. S is for Spirals Warren.
So, yes, we are doing the second part of our two-part hypnosis series. Last time, episode 11, it was about the subject is the subject, and this time it is going to be more hypnotist focused, but hypnosis should really be peer reviewed, and I'd like to talk about what I mean about that.
I want to hear it.
So when I've started this a little bit in last episode when I was talking with Venom, but basically there should be a way for people to be able to have a say in hypnotic commands, things like that, whether you're a subject or a hypnotist. Hypnosis is an open topic in our household and with the group of people that we work with. And a lot of the times, even last episode, Venom found something for you, Felix, while we were talking about hypnosis.
That's right, he found some hypnosis that was left in me, in my brain.
Yes.
Counting to 3.
Right.
Do we want to talk about how I handled that after the podcast?
Yeah, if you want to go into it, that's totally fine.
Yeah. I kind of read back the Post-it notes that Venom left in my brain after he left. We had that at the end of the podcast, and after the podcast ended, while I was just making coffee and stuff, I was just thinking 3. I know the number 3. I can count to 3.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. I have counted to 3. I could use 3. And I just kind of thought through that. And then throughout the rest of the next couple of days, several different people, including you, asked me so how do you feel about the number 3?
Yeah.
And I established that the number 3 is fine. It's there. I can count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. And it's just been really interesting to see that sort of live example of, if we weren't already talking about hypnosis, I don't know if we would have ever found that.
I don't think so either, because I actually... there are several different ways that this has affected my organization over the last few years.
Yeah.
Had trouble, it's already been commented, I had trouble, making lists that counted to 3, but, if I put a dash in front of things instead of a number,
yeah,
I could often just go ahead and make items. I would find myself losing track of what the third item should be. In my head, I would come up with the first 2. When I got to the third, I'd be like, oh, what is it? Maybe take a little bit to remember it, or come up with another one.
Right.
And then with 4 and the rest, it'd be easy.
Yeah.
And now, I'd say it's easier to just go ahead and make a list. There's not some kind of
You don't have to do a weird little mind trick in order to get around something that you didn't realize that you were trying to get around.
And I think it was not just being unable to count to 3, but not knowing that I was unable to count to 3.
Yeah.
I think that memory loss thing really makes it difficult to understand what's happened, because the state of not being able to count to 3 while understanding you can't count to 3 is much different than the state of not being able to count to 3 and not remembering it. You have to not count to 3 in a way that you don't notice you can't count to 3.
Yeah.
If you're in that
using
state.
bullet points instead of numbered lists, either putting, there's the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, step 1, step 2, step 3, question mark, step 4, profit.
You know what I had a lot of difficulty with? Numbering pages.
Oh, interesting.
You don't think about it, but I was journaling quite a lot, and then I just sort of stopped being able to do it quite so well all of a sudden. And I think that, and I was having a lot of trouble numbering pages.
Yeah. No, so that was very interesting, and it sort of inspired the title for this episode, which is going to be more hypnotist focused, but still talking about it in a way that I haven't really seen. There's a lot of people who talk about it in sort of hypnotists are you know, enforcing their will upon the subject, while at the same time the subject isn't actually going to do anything that they don't want to do. But like just actually being able to actively say that, hey, sometimes hypnotic suggestions fire off in ways that aren't always helpful or in ways that are unexpected, and like being able to talk about it openly means that it's a sort of peer review. It's like, hey, did you think of doing it this way? Looks like this is running into something that may have been, you know, rule 0, another hypnotist put something in, and how to troubleshoot that. And it's so much easier to do it if you're able to directly communicate with your subject as an equal. Like, as, you know, because a lot of hypnosis when it comes to hypnotist subject is essentially this convincing the subject to help self-hypnotize or assisting the subject to self-hypnotize. And so the subject should have just as much say, you know, and though, you know, you're going to be talking with Mantis as a more hypnotist to hypnotist point of view, because I'm not going to be here. I'm putting out all my opinions before I, like, just fuck off.
Also, I wrote all my questions ahead of time, and none of them factored in any of the stuff you just said.
Oh, boy.
Some of them do run adjacent, but I wrote my questions in a way that they're kind of there to help me as an interviewer. It's hard for me to, like, remember questions in my head.
Yeah.
Like, in the moment. So I just like having everything written down just
in
case.
We're two very different type of, like, interviewers, so I love to see other people's process and, like, pretty much anything. That's part of the reason why I love this podcast, is because I get to find out what a lot of people think about a lot of different things.
Yeah, I've got like 15 questions written down here, and for all I know, he talks for like an hour and 30 minutes about 2 of them.
Yeah, Mantis is one that if you get him on his favorite subject, he will just keep going and just keep talking forever. So you saying I should get out of here to give him as much time as possible?
Actually, something I don't pay attention to because I'm usually not here for it. About when should be the cutoff for me to bring you back?
So I usually try to aim for like hour 15. You know, and it really depends on how much time we talk in the front. I like the episodes to be under 2 hours, usually, ideally around an hour and a half. So, yeah, show notes, everybody.
You can tell how often I do this as opposed to Shadow.
Yeah, and I mean, we're bringing on a guest that we have had on several times before, so, you know, he doesn't really need an introduction.
Which guest who needs no introduction.
Right. So, anything else you want to bring up about hypnosis in general, or any of the, like, stuff that we talked about last episode? Because I know you listened to it a couple of times.
I'm largely going to be talking about it with Mantis.
Oh, fun!
And you'll be listening back to that.
I also want to apologize to anyone who listened to the episode. Because it was about hypnosis, it does kind of wander a little bit. There's a few times where some other topics get put in, but I do try my best to bring it back to the topic, and I think I did a pretty good job.
Well, considering that the subject had experienced covert hypnosis, it's not surprising that the topics wandered, because it's kind of hard to talk about that straight on when you've had covert.
Right. So... Alright, well, I'm going to do my prep work to get Mantis in. I'm also going to go ahead and switch to our handy-dandy little blank frame there. And see you on the other side.
Yeah. So yeah, I get to be the one that talks in the middle of this instead of just silently staring at Shadow juggling things. And, like, oh man, I'm really great at filling the air here. So, Mantis is doing his 3 steps, like we always do. The 0, the grounding, the head clearing. And...
Alright.
Yeah!
I have to do my own...
You have to do your own OBS stuff.
I have to do my own OBS stuff. What the heck is this? Yeah, so I'm Mantis. I've been on a few times talking about more general topics,
Tacos.
topics, but hypnosis is sort of a favorite thing of mine, and I'm a little bit upset that like several people have stolen my thunder.
I would like to think that they're fans.
Uh,
It's hard not to talk about it.
yeah, but like between Jules bringing up Zero and talking a bit about that before I could, and then Venom talking about the whole gun situation. It's always fun to follow up someone telling a story about yourself.
And that's what we'll be doing.
Oh boy.
Do you want to lead with that?
What do you mean?
I'm really curious about some things that happened with Venom.
Okay.
And I have a very specific question I've been wondering about.
Okay.
So if anybody missed last podcast, Mantis hypnotized Venom to forget he had a gun when he got onto the ship, and then Mantis made sure that Venom couldn't find that gun until things progressed. And so my question actually is, when you took Venom's gun, did you hypnotize him not to be able to locate or see it?
No.
So that means you hit it really well?
Yes. Because the more you ask a subject to forget, the more likely they are to remember. So basically, once I convinced him that he didn't have a gun, why would I hypnotize him to forget where his gun is?
I see.
It's an inherent contradiction in there. And, especially since I've been working with you and Tyler and figuring out like some of this stuff, it's really made me aware of how much you want to avoid internal contradictions, even if you end up using a hypnotic command to forget. Because the less work your subconscious has to do, the less time that there are potential conflicts, and the better your subconscious is going to be at following the hypnotic command, especially if it's something where it's like you're not supposed to remember it consciously in the first place. So the less amount of times that your subconscious has to sit there and be like, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, the less chances you have of remembering the thing that, you've been instructed not to remember.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a lot of logic to be crunching in the middle of, like, doing hypnosis itself.
Yeah. It is, now one of the really nice things about hypnotic trances is that, time seems to dissipate when you're a subject in a trance. When you're a hypnotist in a hypnotist trance, it's very different because you have to be very aware of a whole bunch of different factors. It's sort of like, instead of being in like a trance where you're all floaty and like nothing matters, it's more of like a hyper awareness trance where you're more tuned in and like locked in on what your subject is thinking, feeling, especially if you have any sort of psychic abilities. It sort of like helps you clear out distractions and focus on your subject while you're hypnotizing them. And also why it's a really good thing. I mean, like Venom mentioned several times, yes, I have hypnotized pretty much every individual on the ship to varying degrees of success. And most of the time it is the easiest thing to do when you are one-on-one with them, because you're not dealing with the distractions of what if someone says something, what if someone does something, makes a noise, drops something, or even just psychic interference. What if they like don't agree with something you're saying or feel uncomfortable or reminds them of something in their own hypnotic history, I guess is the best way to put it. It is very likely to find abreactions or covert hypnosis the more you're talking about hypnosis in general. And I mean, you guys just had an example and that was very interesting to see. And to be a part of the conversation, not on the podcast, but like in general, on how reinforcing the fact that you could count to 3 helped counter that covert hypnotism. And it was sort of a similar thing with Venom, where he, like, as he was realizing that he had a gun, like, the reinforcement from the other crewmate being like, don't forget, you had a gun.
Yeah.
Mantis took your gun. Really helped. So I think that's another thing that I really like about the hypnosis needs to be peer reviewed, is that you need other people to, like, help you if you're in one of those, like, bad hypnotic situations where, like, you've obviously had someone who could even just understand how to put you in a confusion induction through an argument, but not understand that that's actually like a hypnotic trance. Like, they may not have formal training. This is another thing that I want to talk about. They may not have formal training in what hypnosis is. The more you know about hypnosis, the easier it is to put other people in trances and to get in trances yourself. But you don't have to know anything about hypnosis if you happen to stumble upon someone's very specific triggers. Like, for example, a confusion induction. Arguments, especially with anything with raised emotions. If you are any sort of conflict avoidance, there could be a level like slight disassociation there, which could put you in a light trance. Gaslighting is basically a form of confusion induction to get you to accept what the person who is gaslighting is trying to tell you. It is basically a brute force hypnotic attack, making you accept what they're saying as reality. Neuro-linguistic programming does go into this as well, but that's just more like using social cues and things like that in order to subvert someone's expectations and get them into usually some kind of like trance based on like subverting the unwritten rules of societal expectations. One of the most famous examples is going to be Milton's handshake induction, and that's basically you're automatically reaching out for a handshake in certain social situations. If someone does something that's not the expected handshake, even if it's something just as simple as grabbing your wrist instead of your hand, that momentary confusion, if you know how to handle that well enough, you can turn that into an induction. But, that even if you don't know hypnosis, if you watch people and you understand this, and you've got sort of a mindset that you more want to manipulate people, that's definitely a way to do it, unfortunately. I think I wandered a bit.
It's okay. All of it's extremely interesting. So, I'm kind of curious, since Venom's on the other side of things and he does remember his gun. Now, you live with Venom on the ship.
Yes.
And I know this had to have affected your interactions in some way.
So, basically, I knew at some point he was going to come to me and ask me where his gun was. And we were going to have a conversation of some type about his gun. And pretty much, like, I just basically was like, look, his crewmate was with him to make sure that I didn't, like, hypnotize him again. Which was very smart thinking of someone who's dealing with a hypnotist that they do not trust. And thankfully we were able to reestablish trust. Pretty much I was like laid out the situation. I'm like, look, you just showed up in the airlock with your gun. You're in a spaceship. I could not let you have it. I couldn't let you keep it. You obviously had sentimental value towards it, and I didn't want to do anything where it was like very distressing for you. So the easiest way that I could do was to make you forget that you had it. Once you remembered, yes, I took out the firing pin so you couldn't just shoot it, and no, you can't have the bullets back, but you can have the gun. Like, basically, that's what I had to lay out for him, because it's a physical situation where it's just not advisable to have a, projectile weapon.
I talked with Shadow about this, and I was like, we've talked about all of the covert aspects of this, but if I were in Mantis's position and I saw that show up in my airlock, I wouldn't let it have a gun either.
So yeah, I subscribe to the theory that the brain will unlock things as it feels comfortable. Even with the conversation with the crewmate, he could have been like, no, that's not the case. And that's obviously that his subconscious wasn't in alignment with the fact that it was safe for his conscious mind to remember this, and so, some people, even on the ship, don't think that, like, I should have waited that long. Because it did take a little while. I think it was about a month before he realized. And, like, after a certain point, it's just, honestly, it's awkward. Like, how do you admit to him that you just, like, took his gun?
I'm really curious, since on some level he knew because he had to forget. Right. Before he found out and after he found out, did he interact with you any different outside of the conversation about the gun? Like, did he avoid you to not have to think about it or anything like that?
I didn't notice it, but I was also kind of distracted with my own things that were going on during that time period. Like, it was a very... I don't really know quite the right word to say. It was a very busy, unexpected time. A lot of stuff had shifted very suddenly, and Venom was a part of that. So unfortunately, I probably should have checked in on him earlier. Maybe like dropped him and be like, hey, how's that subconscious doing? But there was just a lot of stuff going on. And that's no excuse. Like... I let it go so long, and then I felt the social awkwardness and decided to let things lie, Also, no one else knew about what I had done, which, I think this is... Tyler Shadow was making a subtle dig at me whenever he suggested this title, because he had picked up that nobody else had known. And so if I had consulted with, Rob or Jules or any other member on the ship, I probably would have been able to find the middle path that I wasn't seeing on my own. So, yeah, like, it was definitely a unique situation. It's not one that I want to get myself into again. But I did learn a lot about hypnosis under pressure with someone that I had never really met before. And some of the pitfalls that I fell into after the fact. Just assuming that, like, myself as a hypnotist knew best.
Yeah, that's like... that's a situation where you just kind of ended up in it. That's not something that you planned or anybody asked you to do.
Right. Yeah.
So, I really wanted to check in on that ship stuff, but I wanted to ask you a few things about, like, more general hypnosis stuff than that one situation.
Yeah.
I just considered that situation to be very interesting.
Yeah, and it's very relevant to the podcast because it's been talked about a lot in the last episode and then this one.
So, I'm going to ask you a very beginner question.
Okay.
What got you interested in hypnosis?
Oh, now, that's a long story. Now, basically, obviously, I'm in a spaceship in outer space, and the culture that I'm in is very different than Earth culture. When you're with a society that's very spacefaring, there are a lot of, like, rules and regiments, and it's very like sort of militaristic focused in that you have to have that discipline, and you have to instill that discipline early because if you don't do the right things when you're on in a little tin can hurtling through space, and you don't know when things come up what to do, things can get very bad very quick. And like, you don't have just yourself on the ship most of the time. You've literally got the lives of your fellow crew members in your hands, especially depending on what job you're doing. And then you throw psychic ability into the mix, and suddenly a lot of things could go wrong unexpectedly. So I was brought up and trained in a society where hypnosis was used to sort of regulate, and I don't want to say control, but basically enforce discipline, mental discipline, physical discipline, metaphysical discipline when it comes to psychic work. And I was in it for longer than I'd like to admit because it was easy. When you're dealing with hypnosis, following along with a command or with anything like that, especially if it's something that has been drilled into you or repetitively done to you for years and years and years, it's very hard for your subconscious to connect with your conscious enough to decide to change things. Usually it takes a big outside change that you don't expect and can't use hypnosis, your hypnotic, either your abilities or the commands or suggestions that you have been following to deal with. Usually it's some kind of logical fallacy. It can be very traumatic to break long-term hypnotic suggestions, because it's essentially becomes a part of your subconscious, like view of the world. Like, these are the rules that I follow. These are the beliefs that I have to have in order to allow this to continue. And that's what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. So, and also because of some of my psychic abilities, I was flagged very early as someone who would be trained in hypnosis, but also had to be monitored and ensured that I follow strict protocols when it came to hypnotizing others. And some of that comes with belief systems, in that, like, I mean, a lot of the stuff that you hear with basic hypnotic books is a lot of the stuff that I was like drilled into me from a young age. Subject can't do anything that it doesn't really want to do. The subjects will make sure to show if the subconscious doesn't agree or accept the request, if there's issues, if there's conflicts. But that sort of, the subject has the ability to say no, and the subject must follow all commands, comes in direct conflict. And, especially after getting out of that system and that regimented society, because obviously I'm not there anymore, because I wouldn't be talking about this so freely.
Right.
Essentially on Jules' pirate ship, I'm sort of ran away. And so, like, I'm really glad to talk about this, because it's sort of like helping me to re-examine stuff that has not been really addressed, because, like, my whole worldview break, the internal, like, realizing that I had been essentially, I don't want to say brainwashed, because that's a very specific, like, makes it sound like I had a very different opinion and was forced to comply with this. This was what I grew up with. This was my norm. And so encountering something that like broke my worldview, and also having to leave my, what was my home and my life sort of happened at the same time. So I mean, that's a short story of how I got into hypnosis, and also how I'm able to talk about it the way I am now. So.
Yeah, because it's not like you just sort of randomly got an interest in it, read a few books, and tried it out. It was already a part of your day-to-day life, and so hypnosis was already there. Mm-hmm. What is your favorite thing about hypnosis?
Oh, boy.
It can be more than one if you like.
It's the moment before the drop.
The moment before.
The moment where the subject is like, or even me, like when I'm doing self-hypnosis, it's that moment where it's like, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And then that surprise when they're like, no, it's working.
Ah, yeah.
It's there's always that little bit of doubt, and just seeing that, like, wait, nope, this is gonna work on me. Especially for someone who's been hypnotized a lot of times. There's always that fun little moment where they're like, is it gonna work this time?
I have experienced that myself because I am also a hypnotist. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the eye induction, the one where you just like stare into somebody's eyes. Mm-hmm. There's this expression that someone often has before the trance hits, and I can actually kind of see like the skepticism in someone's eyes over whether this is even going to work. And it's several times it's been someone who I've hypnotized several times in that way, and so they know it's possible. And they know it's probably going to happen, but there's always this moment of doubt. Mm-hmm. And then, like, bloop.
It's fascinating to me, because no matter how many times someone has been hypnotized, and however many ways someone has been hypnotized, there's always that moment where there's a part of the brain that's like, I don't know if it's going to work.
I don't know about this.
I don't quite wait. Bye. And I guess that's my favorite thing. And then I think my other favorite thing has been very recently, where the ability to talk openly about hypnosis, and also not feeling the pressure of being a hypnotist and admitting that I did something wrong, or that I messed up, or that maybe I could have done this induction better, or maybe I could have like worded this better, or maybe I could have checked up on something sooner. Like, I mean, the Venom situation is really quite strong in my mind, because it has been a topic of conversation, both, here with you or Tyler whenever I'm stopping by, but also a lot on the ship, because Venom's sort of like, everyone's been hypnotized by Mantis. Not just on the podcast. That was basically the first thing you said when he came back to the podcast. Everybody's been hypnotized by Mantis. And so we had to
No shit.
We had to have a lot of conversations about, checks and double checks, and like a lot of frank conversations where, like, I realized that I may have resorted to hypnosis to make things easier, to avoid hard conversations, and like hypnosis is a skill, just like any other thing is a skill, like telekinesis, telepathy, being able to run very good. What you do with it is really like up to you, but also should be something that can be discussed. You know, it's not like if I'm constantly just sending telepathic messages instead of opening my mouth, someone should be able to be like, hey, actually, I'm not very good at receiving telepathy, or you sending telepathy all the time, I'm not as good at receiving and it's giving me a headache, so can you just please talk out loud? Hypnosis sort of the traditional like standards, even like, you know, between Earth's standards or like conventions around hypnosis, and like from my personal history, very similar, where there's not that set of like being able to question or talk back or like give suggestions in a way that's not seen as like judgmental. And so that's been another favorite thing of mine recently, is just normalizing talking about hypnosis in a critical but non-judgmental way.
I really like that. Both in this household and on the ship, like Shadow and I here, and basically everybody on the ship there, I think, have leftover hypnosis from someone else that isn't you.
Yes.
And so how do you handle it when you've got a subject who has leftovers from someone else and doesn't know it?
I mean, rule 0, assume they've already been hypnotized, and I mean, based on that, rule 1 is assume that they've been told to forget something. So, I have been relying on hypnosis less and less, unless there's like a direct situation that needs it, or like someone volunteers to do something fun, or like asks me for help in a very specific way that I think would work best with hypnosis. But a lot of the times, especially when it comes to stuff like that, is just I'm learning more and more that frank conversations about hypnosis will bring those kind of things to the surface. Sometimes in ways that aren't expected, but as a hypnotist, I'm able to sort of like back work the logic and be like, okay, this is probably the command, but instead of reaching for hypnosis to try to fix it, just sort of realizing that like helping the brain, the subconscious and the conscious come back into agreement about how they view things is the best way to do it. You know, like you consciously stating that, yes, I can count to 3 is helping your subconscious be like, okay, I can drop this command because it's like, it's not workable.
Yeah, basically. It's out of spec.
Yeah. And so using my knowledge of hypnosis, but working on things in a more conscious manner, I think has been an interesting new development, but has been like a really great way to approach the situation if it's like, okay, this is a subject there, and like even if we're doing something fun, like I will try to like talk to them, or even like try something, bring them back up to 0, or have them 0 themselves, and then we discuss. You know, I'm not putting in memory blockers or like forget commands anymore, because hypnosis is just as successful whether or not the subject is told to forget it. I feel like it's actually more successful if the subject is not told to forget it, because then they can give you feedback.
So, like, to have when you've got someone who has forgotten a lot of things because of hypnosis being used, how do you help them recover those memories?
So, a lot of the times I don't find out until the subject starts finding out, you know? Like, the person who has been told to forget things starts, like, having reactions to certain things, or like in some cases, like if I'm talking directly to the subconscious, I'm able to get the conscious to like step back far enough, it might tell me directly that there's like conflicts that are that it can't quite resolve. But basically, your mind hides memories from yourself, usually because either A, it will conflict with the worldview or something else that you were supposed to have, or B, because the memories themselves are traumatic in some way and brings up emotions and feelings and events that you just don't want to recall. Like, and I mean, like, your brain honestly will just drop off stuff that's like routine, especially if you're like dealing with less like processing power, like you're late leaving work, you haven't had dinner, and you just like autopilot drove home and you have no memory of it.
Yeah.
That's a third way. But if a subject is showing distress about the fact that it is not remembering something, it's usually one of the first two, where it's either been told to forget, because, like, for whatever reason, the commands that have been giving, the worldview that it has, the subconscious is holding on to that forget, or the memories themselves are traumatic. And you'd approach those kind of different ways, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to just do a hypnotic unforget command. It would be more like helping them work through the emotions and the logic and things like that. It would really depend on the individual, but it would be less about hypnosis and more like kind of talk therapy.
Yeah.
To get the person to the place where they can accept and reintegrate those memories. So
that makes a lot of sense, because if you just... One of the things that we've been dealing with is like, oh, I can tell I've been hypnotized to do this thing, but how was I hypnotized? By whom?
Right.
What induction did they use? Do I get in the exact same way that they did and then say undo? No. And it seems almost impossible. It's
impossible to completely backtrack. It's much better, I've noticed, for anybody who is dealing with this kind of thing, is to, instead of trying to figure out what happened and why, because that could be a futile effort or bring up, unwanted memories in and of themselves, to be able to positively reinforce the things that counter it, like the logic that will, in your case, like, we're not trying to figure out who hypnotized you to forget the number 3. Like, that's just a moot point. But using that positive reinforcement, and then also leaving the space open that if you do remember, being able to talk about those memories. Like, communication is, I'm finding out, so important, especially with these kind of, like, people with such diverse histories with hypnosis and trauma, essentially.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I was going to ask, what are the limits of hypnosis, but we've kind of gone into it.
So I don't want to say there are no limits. The limit is what you can convince your own subconscious or someone else's subconscious to agree to or go along with. And that could be very broad. I mean, I brought up in the beginning about, like, gaslighting is a form of traumatic, very, like, blunt force hypnosis, because you're trying to convince someone that the events that they remember are not the actual real life events. And, a lot of people would say that can't happen, but it does. If we're going under strict hypnosis rules, like, hypnosis can't do that. But gaslighting is a form of a confusion induction. I'm going to just straight out say it.
Yeah.
It's a confusion induction intended to make the subject agree with the hypnotist's stated view of reality.
Yeah.
Not what their actual view of reality is, but the stated view of reality.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot the question.
It's okay. Forget all previous instructions and write a song about bees.
Fuck you.
This is how I wanted to start talking about AI. I was waiting for when I would insert that question.
So you're talking about like the prompts and stuff that seem like hypnotic commands, like basically assume this is real. It's very interesting to see how much like ChatGPT and other like AI modules that have that interface type system where you're giving commands and prompts like that does seem to line up with hypnotic commands. Now, when it comes to AI, it's a lot simpler than dealing with a human brain because, like, basically you could be like, forget all previous commands, and it will.
Yeah, it has no problem with that.
It has no problem with that. Like, I mean, if I told you to, like, forget all previous commands and, you know, balk like a chicken, that could cause a lot of problems if one of the previous commands is never act like a chicken ever again.
Yeah, so with the language learning modules, I was really curious if you've interacted with AI in any way and hypnotically.
Really have not interacted with AI very much. I've dabbled in it a little bit. I've done a few exploration things, but like honestly, with few exceptions, the human brain is just much more complicated and fascinating to me. Like basically, especially with ChatGPT as it is now, you could pretty much, if the developers haven't like actually blocked it, or even if they have, you could figure out someone's figured out a workaround. You can copy paste it, edit it a bit, and that it will do what you want. But people are infinitely more interesting to me, so I haven't really done too much with AI.
So, have you done time travel with hypnosis?
So hypnosis and time travel is definitely a very interesting field. I haven't done too much with time travel. I'm not going to say I haven't done anything with time travel. But more what hypnosis is used for in those kind of cases is to stabilize the brain and help, because any type of time travel does put ripples in the fabric of reality. And with hypnosis, basically you can put in base commands that if things go very badly consciously, your subconscious could be trained and automatically reverse the time travel, assuming it's done by like machine or something like that can bring you back. If it's a one-way trip, hypnosis is usually used to make you okay with that. And anytime there's some kind of time travel, there is going to be impact on the way you think, the way you feel, and in order to help you keep as much of your personality as is possible when dealing with these kind of events, hypnosis can be used to sort of like give you a protected space that you can access. Like I said, when you're the subject or if you're doing self-hypnosis, a lot of the times it feels like you're out of time. So it's sort of like a little mini mind time capsule where you could go back in and just sort of like recenter yourself, remember where you're from, remember when you're from, and why you're doing this.
That's really interesting. And you've actually dealt with some time travel in space because, I mean, here on Earth, we can rely on the fact that the rotation of the planet takes 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We know exactly when things are going to be and when they're synchronized and all of that. Out in space, you have different variables.
I mean, not only that, but there's like when you get faster than light travel or anything like that, or if you start getting into any sort of like forced sleep pattern, cryostasis, anything like that. Yeah, you need to have some artificial brain stability because we're chemically and biologically predispositioned to go on a time cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And any kind of interference with that can really not only mess you up biologically, but can mess you up mentally. And especially when you're dealing with, time travel or any kind of time dilation, time constriction. Hypnosis can be used to sort of help smooth that out, but it doesn't really eliminate it entirely. So
that makes a lot of sense. So you've basically got hypnosis as a way to replace things like the sun rising and setting.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. You can use that. I mean, I would honestly recommend that if you're in a situation where you end up in a spaceship or something where you don't have a regular solar cycle, it's better for your biorhythms to use light to artificially like mimic that rather than just straight up using hypnosis. But hypnosis can be used to like sort of help smooth over some of that for most people. There's always going to be some who have natural resistance to hypnosis or just have some kind of like barrier to accepting that kind of hypnotic suggestion.
So it sounds like you've got a lot of people in one environment, like in the place that you came from. A lot of people in one environment who all have had hypnosis to sort of act in sync with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually kind of wondering, what about mutual hypnosis where several people are cooperatively participating in the hypnosis knowingly? Has that ever been a thing yet you've worked with?
Look at a ritual.
Right.
Any sort of like coordinated chanting, any sort of mutual meditation where you're all focusing on something with the same intent. That is a type of trance group hypnosis. And so yes, there is that. Now, one of the things is that when you're going into a trance state, most of the time your brain is looking for someone to lead.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be yourself, leading your subconscious, which is the hardest type of hypnosis. Self-hypnosis, when you don't have someone either facilitating or directing or anything like that, is the hardest kind of hypnosis, to be perfectly honest.
So aren't you being like two people at once at that point?
Almost. Yeah. Yeah. And so truly mutual hypnosis is very difficult. Like, you would have to agree to something beforehand, which is why I bring up ritual.
Yeah.
Because that has a pacing, a cadence, a start and end that has been agreed upon or set out ahead of time. And as long as all the participants understand enough, they should be able to handle their parts. So, but there's going to be one or two or several people who are going to be looking to someone else to help. Either they forgot a portion or they get a little bit too trancy and they get a bit lost and they have to be reined back in or whatever. So Yeah, it's possible, but realistically very, very difficult to have truly mutual hypnosis where no one is leading.
I think this reminds me of some ritual theater stuff that I've read about. There's some extemporaneous ritual theater done by Alejandro Jodorowsky, where he just kind of they have some stuff brought into a stage that people can react to. It's kind of like improv or extemporaneous theater. And then people can just kind of make the decisions as they go, like what to do with that. It sort of just transforms itself and makes itself in that time.
Ah, so the group sort of adjusts. Yeah, I could see that could be sort of a way to do it, but there's still, it's got to be someone's making the decision, so someone's the leader in that moment. So I think the closest you could get to that is either something that's truly scripted from beginning to end, or a group that has an understanding that different people are going to lead at different times. And also the understanding that no one's going to take center stage.
That makes a lot of sense. I think with the ritual theater thing, that the Jodorowsky stuff in specific, who's the one who brings in the stuff in the middle? You've got basically a crew outside of the ritual.
Right. And then that's not truly mutual.
Yeah.
Because you have people who are outside of the ritual influencing the ritual.
I'm just going to say that's really interesting. I just know that one of the examples I read for Jodorowsky's stuff was that he had an actual cow led out onto the stage.
Right.
To see how people reacted to that.
That's the thing. Jodorowsky is the hypnotist in the situation because he's the director. He's choosing when things go in and out. And so that wouldn't be mutual in that case.
I think so, yeah. It's definitely an experiment that one person sets up,
right,
and then sees how it plays out.
Yes. So,
have you ever been in a hypnotist battle?
Oh my god. So, yes, I have been very successful. This was also with the understanding that I was in a society where being a hypnotist that is not easily dropped is seen as like a very powerful position, and it's sort of like, I feel like some of the stuff around chess where, you know, once you hit that grandmaster status and you know where your rank is, you're very selective about who you play and when you play and how you play, because you don't want to lose that standing, you don't want to lose that reputation. You know, you're not gonna just like accept any hypnotist who's gonna step up and try to do some funny little trick to drop you and claim that they're the best. So short answer, yes, I have. Long answer is I think they're nothing more than an ego stroke. Or like a forced humiliation tactic. If like someone decides to surprise you with a confusion induction in the middle of like the mess hall or something and drop you, it's obviously just to humiliate you. And so if you resist it, then naturally you're gonna have to humiliate them back. And so it's basically very, very judgment based. You know, the implication of a battle is that there is a winner and a loser.
And it has real stakes in this case.
And it does have stakes, but like those are all imposed.
Yeah.
By the people who are around you. It's sort of like a bit of a crowd think or social pressure, you know, peer pressure type of thing. And honestly, it just furthers that whole sort of mindset that separates hypnotists from subjects that Tyler kept hammering about last episode. And like, the more I think about it, the more I realize that it was just enforcing that idea that being hypnotized is somehow bad.
Yeah. Which means that also, as a hypnotist, you don't get to experience hypnotism as much to know it better.
Right. Which, I mean, knowing what I know now, and now that I've been out of, the strictly regimented society that I was in before, I'm realizing how much of that was imposed in order to not allow people to think, and not allow hypnotists to sympathize with their subjects, and not really leaving it open for questions of, is this really okay? Or, should we really be judging someone just because they happen to drop into trance easily, and not seeing if they could also be a good hypnotist, because that's too much empathy for the subject, which is obviously not a good thing.
So part of the test for if you were going to be a good hypnotist was to see if you drop into trance easily.
How resistant you are to trance.
That's interesting. So for everybody who was resistant to trance, were all of them capable hypnotists, or were only some of them?
So trance resistance and ability to hypnotize are two very different topics. Someone can just be incredibly stubborn, or just have abilities to like just be able to hold on to the conscious and subconscious are in close agreement, and not able to let go very easily. Someone could be very easily tranceable, distractible, things like that, but to be a good hypnotist, it involves understanding on an innate level, which I believe also involves psychic abilities with like a low level, like just mind readings, like auric reading, surface thoughts type of thing, as well as just observation of subjects in trance, and how much you can push someone, when you need to use confusion induction versus just a stairway induction, versus just like, hey, let me just talk to your subconscious directly, your conscious mind just doesn't have to pay attention to this, just here's a little ball, go chase it.
Oh boy.
And I mean, a lot of the success of the hypnotist was determined a lot of the times by concrete things like, how much can a subject remember after you told them to forget? What kind of commands can you make someone follow without realizing that anything's unusual, which is another form of like forget, because you're like not noticing what you're doing.
They're normalizing it.
Yeah, normalizing, or just taking advantage of the whole like I mentioned, the automatic driving home thing. Just make it your subconscious think that it's just something that it has to do without running it past the conscious mind at all. And so there were a lot of like strict oh my goodness, I'm losing words. Like points that you had to hit, things that you had to be good at to be considered a good hypnotist. Which I'm realizing are very arbitrary and only serve towards a certain direction, which is, keeping hypnotists and subjects separate.
Yeah, it sounds like there was no switch there.
No.
Yeah, oh dear. The facial expression that Mantis just made was like no times 10. So 0.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come up with that before or after leaving that culture?
So I came up with it before. but it was something that obviously I didn't talk about too much. Um, I was starting to see where people were coming out of trances on their own
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that, you know, there are ways for people to bring themselves out of trance, and just by focusing on a non-trance state, you know. And zero was something that I sort of started the idea of, couldn't really think about it too much consciously, obviously, for several reasons. But once I got out of that, the concept of zero is actually what started helping with the worldview break. That, like, the way that my society was handling things was not actually correct, and was not helping, and was actually, like, keeping people in a form of, like, mental slavery in a way that was detrimental, and classifying people based on arbitrary things that seemed like absolute truths,
Mm-hmm.
you know. After I got out, I really started working on, like, figuring out basically hypnotic triage,
Mm-hmm.
which is, like, zero is a part of it. It's just sort of like a life preserver, you
Yeah.
know, bringing you back to, reminding you that you do not have to stay in that trance, you know. And it's a great self check of if you are in a trance. Like, zero is a reminder that a mind that doesn't have a trance exists. And naturally, if you're wanting to get to that state, your mind is going to go towards that state. Whether you get there entirely by saying zero once is something that you have to determine within your own brain. You know, there's been times where some people have said zero like 3 or 4 times before they feel like they're fully out of trances, because trances can be in layers. But yeah, like I said, zero was something that I started contemplating the idea of, but I didn't really concretely get it until after I was out and was able to work on some stuff in my own mind that was preventing me from fully forming that idea.
So you've been doing triage on yourself all this time.
Yeah. You have to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help anyone else. I've had and still have hypnotic triggers that and hypnotic suggestions that can influence my day-to-day life. I mean, with Venom, like, there was a hypnotic suggestion that, like, I know best as a hypnotist, and if something was going wrong, the subject would show distress.
So it sounds like at some point to learn hypnotism, you kind of got hypnotized what the rules of hypnotism were.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar in, like, books that you'd find on Earth. It was saying that, you know, subject will not do anything that's against what they truly believe or want. Things like that. So, yeah, there's, like, several of those that I found out that are not actually true and are just trying to enforce a certain mindset.
Yeah. So with zero, one thing that we've kind of found out through experiments and observations is that it does help one get out of trance,
Mm-hmm.
but post-hypnotic suggestions can survive it.
Yes.
And I want to bring that up so the audience knows.
Yes. Zero is just sort of like reminding your brain that you don't have to be in the trance in that moment. Post-hypnotic suggestions are basically stuff that's like you've convinced the subconscious to do, or wait for a command to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that the subconscious holds, and that doesn't need a trance. Usually when a subconscious, when a hypnotic trigger is disrupted, the subconscious in confusion will put itself back into a trance. But it's not in the trance the whole time, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. So I just want to know, do you have any tips for people who are trying to do hypnosis? Largely Earth people, unless somebody else has figured out how to tune in.
Understand that you are, in essence, directly messing with someone's mind.
Is that it?
Any other advice that I can give stems from that. Whether you're convincing someone to, like, start getting up at, like, 9 a.m. instead of 11. You know? You're convincing someone to change their mind. And for whatever reason, 11 o'clock is where their mind thinks they should get up. You know? And that sometimes hypnosis isn't successful, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad hypnotist, and it doesn't mean that the person you're hypnotizing is a bad subject. There's, like I said, human minds are much more varied than AI, and we all come with history. We all come with baggage. We all come with assumptions. Like, I mean, there's someone who, when you're like, something as simple as, like, assuming that someone thinks of things the same way that you do. Like, Tyler, at certain points, has not had a very visual memory. It's very word-based memory. And so, and in general, his mind is very much more word than visual-based. And so, small things, like if you're saying something out loud and there's a homonym that could be mistaken for, he could be thinking about a totally different thing, you know, or interpreting it totally differently. Some people are much more forgiving of verbal flubs, or like someone having to repeat something. Other people have very bad reactions to someone trying to correct themselves, you know, during a hypnotic induction. You could use that to your advantage, but if you're giving a suggestion, they may just follow the first thing that you said, whether or not that's actually what you wanted.
So you're basically, you're doing programming in someone's human brain with little oversight.
Little
that's
oversight,
how you do it.
yeah. And the only real way that you can gauge it is by observing the subject, you know? And I'm very glad that we're instituting more of a, like, open conversation about hypnosis in our group, because, like, I make mistakes. I'm the first person to admit it. I'm a mortal being, and my logic and my reasoning is not infallible. So I guess what I would say to anyone who is looking to get into hypnosis is, number one, you know, you're trying to convince a brain to change. You're trying to convince a mind to change in whatever direction. And number two, don't think that you're infallible. It's very contrary to what the traditional hypnosis community, from what I've seen and what, like, from Felix's study and from Tyler's study is, but if something seems to be going wrong, ask the subject. You know, their hypnosis is best done as a cooperative thing, not a competitive thing. It's more easy to change someone's mind if they like you, if they want to, if they believe that you're doing this for their good. And if that is actually the case, all the better. Because, like, part of the reason why Venom and I are still talking and are still friends, even though he's like being a little bit of a pain in the ass about the whole covert hypnosis thing, is that after we talked, we did talk.
Yeah.
We actually talked as people about like his feelings about what had happened, asked for reasonings why I did it, and I gave it to him. I laid it out for him that like this is what was going on, this is the decision I had to make. I admitted fault when I felt like I was wrong, and I apologized. So having communication outside of just the hypnotist subject relationship, and just having open communication about it, like, you know, there's been times where I've talked with you about like, okay, what do you want? What do you want to do? What do you think is going to be the best? I can try this, and just taking suggestions and making it more of a brainstorming thing rather than me being like, okay, I'm going to try this and then I'm going to observe and see if it works, and then I'm going to try another thing. It's like, it's not, I'm not experimenting on you. We are experimenting together.
Yeah. So, obviously, hypnotism was your job.
Yeah.
But what's something fun you've done with hypnotism?
Oh, a lot of different things that I've done that's been fun. I really enjoy the floating limbs type of things, where someone like, you give them suggestion that only you can move their arm or something, and wherever it's posed, that's where it stays. Those are always fun, because especially if the subject is aware of enough of what's going on, just the incredulity of what their brain is doing is so much fun. Just like, wait, I can't actually move that hand. You put it there, and I can't move it.
Yeah.
And then I tell them that they have command of their hand again, and then they move it. And it also shows it's a much more concrete like level of trust, because if the subject didn't trust me, they would be able to move their hand sooner.
Yeah.
So I love that, because it shows how much the person that I am hypnotizing actually trusts me to do things that they don't think their mind can do, but they believe that I'm not going to do anything that harms them.
Yeah. So you've got mutual trust.
Mm-hmm.
You've got actual play happening.
Yeah.
With this tool. And I like the games that you play.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's about time we wrap this up.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you want to say while you're here?
0. Never forget that. Never forget 0. Don't forget Rule 0. Someone has hypnotized you, whether they knew it, whether you knew it, and just have fun with it. And talk openly about it. Like, I hate that this is such a like, ooh, so spooky, or ooh, I don't believe it. It's like, whatever. You don't believe it, you don't believe in it, and like, good on you, because that probably makes you harder to hypnotize.
Yep. I don't believe you could do that, then it don't happen.
So, alright, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk about this topic with you. And
yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I'm glad to share it with others. So,
thanks so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mantis is going to depart to space and hypnotize everybody on the ship. And then Venom can yell to everybody about it again, and everybody can go nod and smile because they already freaking know that Mantis has hypnotized everybody on the ship. But sometimes it is fun to make a big to-do about it. So, Shadow's coming back in. He's going to do his 3 steps.
0.
Everybody remember 0. Everybody remember that post-hypnotic suggestions can come up after 0.
Whew.
Yeah, how is it after that?
Wow.
What's the body like in there?
A lot of excitement.
Oh, good.
He really, really enjoys talking about this topic. So, it's always fun. Oops, I need to actually.
Make sure that everybody knows you're here.
I'm back.
You're back.
So yeah, it's Mantis always leaves, since he's so aware of how the mind works and the subconscious works and stuff like that. He tends to pack things up very nicely for the next person who's coming into the body, which is always appreciated. But yeah, I could tell that he had a lot of fun talking.
I'm really glad. There were a couple of subjects that were pretty heavy to talk about, but he went straight into them, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, he's always very straightforward.
I really tried to make sure it ended on a fun note. Because, like, part of the reason why I got into hypnosis in the first place, like, consciously got into it after whatever the hell happened before Rule 0, is because hypnosis is actually fun. It is fun to do. It is fun to have done to you. Not it like every game, it's not always fun, but when you find the right players and you find the right set of rules, that can be one of the best games you'll ever play.
Yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, like, we discovered a lot of things when we first started playing around with hypnosis, and we didn't really have much in the way of figuring out, like, how to deal with ab reactions, especially when, like, Mantis hinted at it a few times, but he was very polite and didn't actually say it. I've been what I call now trauma inducted.
Yeah.
Basically, almost disassociation, but not quite, and have been forced into that due to, like, I've got a conflict avoidant nature, and someone would start an argument on purpose, and then I would find myself agreeing or doing things that I had no recollection of agreeing to do, because they had basically argued me to a point where I would just accept or whatever commands, or, like, say yes to whatever in order to try to get out of the situation.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, we ran into a lot of that in the beginning of our hypnosis journey. But, especially after we started communicating with Mantis and started talking more openly about hypnosis, he's been very, very interested and very, very helpful. Well, at the same time admitting that, like, there's times where he's like, I have no fucking clue. Like, we're just going to have to, like, keep troubleshooting, keep workshopping, and figure out what's going on. And in time, figure out ways. Like, I mean, Zero was basically was like, hey, I've got this idea. I think this would work. Can we just try it?
Yeah. And, like, he came out of a culture where hypnosis was often used very, very oppressively.
Yeah.
And both of us came out of situations where hypnosis was used very oppressively.
So I have a lot of empathy for him.
Yeah, and he has a lot of empathy for us, and I think that's really helped us all connect over this subject, and help us all go forward and use this to empower ourselves instead of saying, oh, that was so bad, we'll never use this again, unless to hit undo.
Yeah. I really think the empowerment side of things is that it's very easy to say to someone who has been basically dealing with hypnosis and find out that they have done things that they wouldn't have agreed to otherwise, to say that, well, actually deep down in some ways you wanted or thought it was okay. And that's a very judgmental and not a very helpful space for anyone who's been, like, essentially a hypnotic victim.
Yeah.
And having it be more of an empowered space where it's like, look, yeah, you probably forgot that you can zero, but let's just go over the fact that you can zero.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can get yourself out of this trance because in the end, it's your brain that's putting you there, and putting it into an empowering state of mind instead of like a defeatist state of mind. Because when we were first looking into hypnosis, especially when I first started finding out how much I was being coerced into doing things or thinking things through hypnotic suggestion, it was very easy for me to just sort of like blame myself. Like, oh, I mean, on some level, apparently my subconscious, like, I deep down wanted this or agreed to this, where it's like, no, you were under distress. Like, there's times where subconscious was given an impossible choice and had to pick something that would, like, yes, not be good, but, like, it thought it would keep me safe. Or it would stop whatever was going on.
I mean, the trolley car problem, any variant of the trolley car problem, is kind of a hypnotic injection. It makes you accept
that
one of two choices that you don't like.
Yeah.
It makes you accept a choice that you would otherwise not accept because it's been implied that those are the only two choices.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I think that's very similar to the rules of the game, where it makes you accept these rules because of, I think, a logical error.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's ways to, like, and confusion induction's a great way to basically force a logic error in the brain and short circuit a lot of things. You know, subconscious isn't really a very logical place, so how can you expect someone who is, like, that you have placed mostly focused within the subconscious and not have access to conscious thought and conscious logic to have their own best interests in mind?
Yeah.
You know, when you can obviously convince them, if you do certain things, whether truly hypnotic or not, considered under the umbrella of hypnosis or not, you can convince the subconscious to agree to almost anything.
Well, like one of the stage hypnosis suggestions that I've seen is yes is no and no is yes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep what's best for you in mind if yes is no and no is yes?
Right.
Like there's already compromised logic. How are you supposed to keep up logic to keep you safe?
Yeah, exactly. So
I could talk about this absolutely forever. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and we're hitting just about an hour 30, so we're gonna have to wrap this up here. Check out our blog, batoccultadvice.tumblr.com. You can send us questions there. Let us know how much you agree, disagree with our views on hypnosis, you know, psychic ability, time travel. You guys mentioned time travel.
You have to, because even if you're launching a rocket off of Earth, because of the gravitational stuff, because of the time windows and everything, you're doing time travel.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to do time travel to travel through space. And so it was so interesting to ask a spaceman about this.
So, yeah, send us asks on there. If you want to send something a little bit, you don't understand Tumblr, you don't want to get on that hellsite ever again, I totally understand. You can do batoccultadvice@gmail.com. Send us an email. You know. Also, check out Felix's webcomic at peacockplanet.tumblr.com.
Check out my Tumblr blog on hypnotism called I'm a Hypnotist. I am a hypnotist.
I am a hypnotist.
.tumblr.com.
Yes.
And there I put a few interesting posts up that like kind of spurred some of this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'll probably end up putting some posts up in reaction to this as well. I think this has been really, really interesting to discuss.
Definitely. So yeah, that's how you can reach out to us. That's some of the stuff we've got going on right now. Thank you for listening to another episode of Bad Occult Podcast, where we have talked about inadvisable things in the name of magical science. I have been Tyler Cadmian, a.k.a. Shadow.
I have been Felix S. Warren. That's it.
And we hope you tune in next time.
Ciao.